Certainly one of the most challenging aspects of scientific writing can be working with other authors. For that matter, being a scientist, one of your greatest challenges will be with working with other scientists, collaborating on projects. This can be highly rewarding, can also be highly frustrating, depending on where you see yourself in this depiction. Do you see yourself as the serious person who gets work done, or you see yourself as this person who clowns around, takes it easy? Multiple authors in publications inevitably will lead to problems, and I hope I can give you some tips to smooth those out. First of all, how is it that you're going to share documentation? Are you going to be sending everything through email back and forth? Do you want to use some sort of cloud service so that you can easily work on things at the same time, a shared document? In any case, you're going to want to make sure that you CC all authors for your publication. It's going to prevent just so many problems, and if people feel left out or out of the loop, this will keep them in. If they say, hey, please don't send me these, well, maybe not, but for the most part, you want to always CC everybody that you're going to be sending this publication to for each draft, for each revision. I would suggest that you develop a solid log system for actually going about saying which version it is that you're using. So you've got your document / draft, or and probably better is something like version 0.1. That's going to be your draft phase, or like first final vision. Because what can end up happening is you've got like your paper / final / real final / version 3. One good convention is that once somebody has actually read through it, that they do their document, and maybe you got something like a date. That's a good way to show which one's the most recent. But you might want to do document, and then whatever version that you're doing, draft, final, or version 2.0, and so on. But you put the initials behind to show who's actually done some work on it. This is what I usually do when I send people my own feedback, is I'll end the document with my own initials to show, okay, this was the work that I've put into it as well. This is the work that you can expect from me. Multiple author publications should really help with at least minimizing some aspects of the workload. You can share it. That's the best benefit of having multiple authors to work with. Not only can you share the workload, but you can get different perspectives. You can get everybody's perspective. Some people are more experts in the method. Some people understand the bigger picture. And you should use that now. You should use that, and you should be able to lean on other people for help. If you've actually gotten some feedback or some work from everybody, then try to avoid these things. Don't just trust that everybody is a great writer and accept all changes outright. So when you go into the comments, look at everything, you think like, I'm sure they know what they're doing. I'm just going to accept all changes because that's probably the easiest. You're going to probably want to go through them. Now, granted, that could take some time, but usually you can read it paragraph by paragraph, and if you like the way it sounds, just highlight the whole paragraph and just say accept for changes, and you'll be fine. That is, of course, if they're using the function that you track all changes, which shouldn't we all be doing that? You shouldn't just make changes to the version that the original author wrote. Instead, try to leave tracked changes so that they have the option to accept or not. Try to avoid allowing others to comment without any further obligation. This can be when someone says, you need a new citation here, or sometimes you'll get very vague comments like, what? Or unclear. If you feel like they're spot on, like, oh, that is unclear, I do need to change that, okay, that's fine. But if someone is just giving these really short comments that are super unhelpful, then call them out on it, write them, what do you mean for this point? Or call for elaboration. What citation do you recommend? And things like that. This is This is really frustrating when you, the writer, have to try to decipher what other people may be meaning by their comments. Don't let it go. Don't leave the guesswork to you. If you really don't know, then pursue the answer. And definitely avoid letting too much time pass between versions of your paper. People are busy. They have probably forgotten. It's not like they're just letting it sit on their desk on purpose. It's usually nothing malicious. Send reminders. Send reminders out so that you can get this thing done. Don't be too shy about that. If 1 week has passed and nothing's been done, you don't see any progress, by all means, just send a reminder. And you can always try to set a default date too. Say, if you don't respond by this time, I will expect that you have basically given your permission that everything is okay. You don't want to always be waiting on other people. So you try to set up different ways to make sure that you won't just be doing just that, just waiting for other people to respond. You should try to look for ways to share work through common documents, or just, in this case, if two people are writing two different publications and they're similar, try to give each other some feedback and help each other out. Or try to get on as a co-author, you never know. But also really look for ways to give and get constructive feedback. And this can be difficult because, let's say, our supervisors are too busy to give us adequate feedback. Nevertheless, try to go after things that are unclear and try to go after really how to improve on something instead of just getting small bits and pieces that may not really make sense as feedback. Basically just they're highlighting problems without really giving you any sort of advisement. That being said, just because there are supervisors and have most likely published more than we have, doesn't mean that they're good writers. So if you read something and think, I don't really know about that, you don't need to accept it. You may need to somehow justify that later, but it's your call. If this is your paper, don't forget, your call. Actually getting peer feedback. So as the writer, you want to not just ask for feedback, but it can be very effective to state your expectations for feedback. So what does that mean? You can ask for certain things. Say, hey, this is almost at the very end. I just want you to check for these minor details. Or it could be towards the beginning when you just say, I'm trying to make sure that this is good enough in the methods. Usually you want to have certain criteria like, all right, right now I'm focusing on the clarity of the message, the clarity that everything makes sense. Or you're checking for substance. I want to make sure that these citations are good, that the methods are very clearly stated, that the results make sense. And oftentimes it's at the very end and you just want that polishing things for grammar and fine revision. If you just put a paper out there to your co-authors and say, let me have some feedback, that's very vague. But if you focus them in on this is the kind of feedback I want, for them, that may seem less daunting. That may seem like an easier task to do, especially if it's like, give it a quick pass. This is a sanity check. Then it can be easier for them, and you should expect that the results will come about a little bit faster. You want to wait for feedback, sure, not too long though. And you want to thank people when it's received. This is just a good way to acknowledge the work that other people have done. Even if it's not great feedback, thank them for the effort. This is about working together, and often just the acknowledgement that other people are doing work with you is a powerful tool to build and strengthen relationships. Respond to that feedback when needed and make sure that you understand everything. It's nothing worse than someone giving a comment like, what? With 2 question marks. It's like, does that mean? Are you surprised about the result because it's a good thing? Are you just confused? Please elaborate. When it comes to authorship, treat authorship like a business deal. And this can be tough because as scientists, we're not really set up to be good when it comes to these business transactions. But you want to define these contributions and your expectations basically before you're writing, basically before the experiment is even underway. If they're expecting to be an author, then they got to give something, right? They need to contribute. And in order for them to contribute, you might need to already set up the expectations from your side. So this could be about the writing, this could be about the designing, this could be about running the actual experiment. Really set something up ahead of time. Don't leave it all to just not saying anything. Don't leave it all up to just your expectation. It's like, I'm not going to say anything. They know how this works. I'm just going to make sure that they do it by the honor system. No. In science, we do need to think about things in a little bit better of a business sense of, I'm telling you my expectations. This is what you need to contribute, instead of just leaving it more open and hoping everything works out at the end. Because if we wait until the end, things don't often work out so well. Discuss what changes can and will be made if conditions are not followed. The next part of the business is the follow-through. If you do this, if you are able to contribute this, you're on the paper. And not just on the paper, but the position. If you want to be shared first author, this is the expected contribution that you will have to give. And if you meet those expectations, then you get it. If you don't meet those expectations, that means either not double first author, but a co-author, or your position in the list down the line. This one's a tough one to enforce, but any changes to authorship should be discussed with the current authors to make sure that it is fair. I know we often don't really have the power in deciding whether that's going to actually work or not, but it should actually be that way, and you may want to decide if that's okay or not. Remember, if you're the first author and this is your publication, you do have say in that. So if all of a sudden you get a revision back and there's 2 new authors on there, you should probably say something. And this is a great opportunity for you to potentially get some value, because this happens. This happens that all of a sudden you get it back and it's like, oh, well, we're collaborating with this person over in another country. This is sort of their topic. We want to put them on there just to, give it a little bit of notoriety, increase that potential impact. You could say, hey, well, that's great, but this is all my work, and so I should probably talk to this person, or you should put me in contact so they can, give me that, at least that connection. At the very least, that this should improve your network. But also, you should potentially talk about what kind of papers they're writing and see if there can at least be something of an exchange. In an ethical sort of perspective, some people are against that. It's like, well, if I didn't actually really work on their paper, then I shouldn't appear on it. And vice versa, if people didn't work on my paper, then it shouldn't appear. We don't really always have full control over every aspect of this. I know, science has a deep-seated hierarchy, which is a little bit ridiculous at times. But if that's going to happen to you, at least maximize the value for yourself. And the most important thing for the business sense is that when you set all this up, that the agreements that you can actually make should happen before the experiments actually take place. Because as soon as everything's ready to go and published, people will probably already stake a claim and say, hey, we talked about this before, remember? So as long as they've done their expectations, then it should follow through. And as long as it's been agreed upon before, it should make things a lot easier. Clearly, not all issues can be prevented. One of the biggest concerns when it comes to problems that can arise from publishing and potentially with working with other people is plagiarism. So what is plagiarism? Well, it's passing off others' work as your own. And there are many different kinds of plagiarism, and it can get a little bit weird, to be quite honest. So the most common problems with plagiarism is that you've set off some sort of plagiarism algorithm. And publishers nowadays, not all of them, but many of them will pass through some sort of searching function, some algorithm that determines to what level something is plagiarized. It's kind of interesting to even see these in action. You can see how similar your writing is to other people's writing. The most classic being just copy pasting. So if you copy some article directly, some passage, and put it into your work, that can set off these algorithms. Technically, rephrasing other people's work, even their texts and figures and tables, can be considered plagiarism, but I mean, come on, it's so widespread. What are you supposed to do? So, if you're going to be citing somebody else's work, then you do need to rephrase it and make the wording different than what they actually have, and usually you're just fine. If it's close enough, technically you should be using quotes, but you'll want to do quotes fairly sparingly within publications. I mean, how many actual quotes have you seen in scientific publications? It's something that, if used, should be used very sparingly. My advice is to give credit where credit is deserved. Just put in other people's work, make sure that the citations are there, and if you need to, say that this person and all, and then the year, wrote that this was their result. You know, you can always phrase things in that way so that the citation does not come at the end, but actually is the dependent piece in the front of the statement to come. You got to watch out for other forms of plagiarism. Kind of these double publishing papers is a weird one, but my absolute favorite is self-plagiarism. You can't even copy and paste your own material into your paper. Now, this can happen a lot in the methods, and if you go back to that section, you'll see that I recommend that if you're just going to copy and paste a whole method section, it's a lot better just to say that it's already been done and reference where somebody else should look. So just say the same procedure as, and then you cite that paper, and it could be your own. That's going to save you potentially getting that algorithm set off about your own plagiarism. We've talked about different forms of writing, but mostly just about research papers. There are other forms of writing that are obviously very important to us, especially things like our dissertation, a very large writing project that we'll have to come across. And I'm going to focus some time and talk about just that. But let me also talk a little bit about other forms of writing, like press releases. Do you know how to release a press statement about your paper? Well, in this case, you have a chance to speak to a more journalistic perspective, people who are looking for interesting stories. I think it's a great idea to practice writing a press release. And you can look up just a template on a press release, just go ahead and Google that and you'll find something. But this is a great way to actually get a little bit of just that, some press, a little bit of notoriety, a little bit of excitement generating, some buzz generating about your paper. It's not going to work for all topics, but especially if something sounds like something that speaks to a general audience, or even more of like a more popular publication, think about a magazine or something where it could fit into the audience of that publication that isn't necessarily scientific. A press release is going to just basically say, I have done this work and these are the implications. You could think of it similar to a cover letter. It's very much a cover letter that that sells, really. It sells your idea. It sells your message. And it can be very successful if you can, especially if you want to gain some sort of buzz about the work that you've done. The more press releases you get out there, the more interviews you're going to get, which just means that you will slowly but surely be considered an expert in the topic that you have. So try that out. Next paper you have, think about the main result when it comes to a general audience and see if you can get the press to pick up on it. Proposals, grant applications, CVs, these are all places where you're going to need good writing. And those are all very specific in their own realm. so I'm not going to cover too much about them. Just remember that you want to really stick to a point. You don't want to be overly verbose. You want to make sure that everything is written clearly and directly. I want to spend a little bit of time talking about dissertations, because this is something that you'll probably have to plan in the future. And it's really important to know about the options that are available to you and also know exactly the criteria of a dissertation. For instance, you may not be writing it right now, but do you know what's required of you for a dissertation? What kind of dissertation are you going to write? Is it going to be a cumulative dissertation, or is it going to be publication-based? Publication-based is generally that you have to write up 3 different publications and have something of a common theme amongst them that you can discuss about as in a greater body of work. And cumulative dissertations tend to be, you didn't do all the publications you need. Instead, it's a write-up of what you've been doing in however long your PhD has lasted, 3 to 5 to more years. Don't be afraid to ask for time off either. A dissertation can take a long time and you'll need to focus. Hopefully you've been keeping up with some sort of writing practice. It will seem less daunting. But by all means, ask for a little bit of time off so that you can focus and get as much writing done and as focused and concentrated of a time as possible. A good template is very valuable when it comes to writing a dissertation and can really help you, especially when you're feeling stuck. It's that roadmap that's going to keep you from getting stalled and getting lost and feeling unmotivated. Don't be afraid to jump around. You're not just trying to write from point A to point B, just a title to the very last reference. Sometimes you're going to want to switch around a little bit. You're going to get stuck in one spot, know where to jump to the next spot without losing too much time. And be a little bit creative when it comes to the dissertations. It can be a little bit tricky to really find that common theme, especially if you're interdisciplinary. It could be very obvious. You were working very specifically about one topic, but for me personally, I had a very interdisciplinary 3-year PhD program where I did 3 fairly unconnected ideas, just trying out different methods, trying out different questions, trying out different fields, disciplines. Well, in this case, sometimes you need to get a little bit creative, and in that case, you might want to go a little bit bigger picture. So for me, I had 3 different experiments. They didn't all use the same method. They weren't all in the same realm, and so I took a greater perspective of the psychological construct of self to kind of put together all my topics into one thing that I could write about. But make sure you know the format that you're supposed to actually use. So for each, either a cumulative or a publication-based dissertation, know what is actually required of you. Sometimes they can be rather short. For me, it could be as short as 15 pages of actual written information, not including the actual publications tacked on to the end. So you don't actually need to go into hundreds of pages of material, maybe for something like a cumulative dissertation, but it is not always a requirement. It's a good idea to know the format of your dissertation. How long does it need to be? What are the formal requirements? For that matter, what are your requirements to get your PhD? Do you need 2 publications, 3 publications? These are really good things to know, and I'm always kind of surprised how close people are to the end of their PhDs without really knowing the details. For instance, sometimes you can get away with just 2 publications, or even a single publication if it is put in a good journal. Often you don't need 3 first author publications, but maybe you just need 2 and a co-authorship. Does double first authorship count? In which position do you need to be in order for it to count? All good things to know. But the idea of the format of your dissertation can be quite different. The general formats for a dissertation are that it includes the following items that you see here. Your abstract, introduction, literature reviews, statement of problem, hypotheses, or research questions. And then you get basically the rest of it. Methods, presentation of the data, which basically results, your interpretation, discussion, conclusion, references, supplementary publications. So you tack on all the publications that you've already published. That should be easy enough. That's a copy and paste job that isn't considered plagiarism. A dissertation. Really, when you do this, even though you've done 3 separate publications or more, or doing something cumulative, the real goal of it is once again to have a solid message. In this case, it's a strong thesis statement. In this case, it's similar to any kind of writing goal. You talk it over, pitch it so that you know you've got a nice tight message, and you want to squeeze it into a sentence or 2. Let's just say tops 2, so that you've got a really tight message that you're trying to get through. That's going to be your statement, the purpose of the writing that you're going to be going through here. You can think of it like a single question, or just you've taken a stand and making a definitive statement. Take a stand on an issue that this is what you feel like, or this is the direction things are going. This is the gap that you've identified and that you are about to fill. You can express your main idea and then try to be as specific as possible. That doesn't mean that you have to go so narrow that you miss the big picture, but in 2 sentences it can be kind of difficult. So think about your statement as you're speaking to an audience that has a clear understanding of what's going on, since the people who will be then reviewing this are probably, let's say, experts in your own field. You can already assume a high level of knowledge to make your statement as specific as it needs to be. The abstract in a dissertation is quite different than a scientific publication. It can be much, much longer. And in this case, it's usually from 1 to 2 pages. The intro itself, it can be a lot more in-depth, covering just a wide variety of topics, considering each one of your papers might be slightly different. So you'll not only have to cover something of an introduction of those 3 pieces of work, but whatever theme you chose to kind of expansively cover all your topics. So if I use my example, I wrote a paper about self. It's even called Aspects of Self. Self, body, emotion, and social being. So those were like 3 different aspects of self. So I had to introduce those as constructs of self, and then kind of the overarching idea of what is self. Luckily, I was part of an institute that did interdisciplinary neuroscience and philosophy, so I was able to kind of take some license when it comes to using some philosophical ideas. But your own institutes will have different sorts of allowances. If you're having trouble to find a common theme, talk about it with some other people, see what they might have done, get some advice from your supervisors. If you don't have anyone to ask, send me an email. Maybe I can help you. Try to get regular feedback when you're doing his dissertation, and this can just be vital, that you don't get stalled. You don't just stop working for a long period of time, lose all the motivation, and then have that uphill battle in order to get the motivation back to really start writing again. It's like getting back to work after a vacation. It's like extra difficult. But as long as you don't take too long of breaks, that's not as much of a problem. And one of the easiest ways to not take too many breaks is to kind of have someone who's helping you along, giving you regular feedback. You also just don't want to wait too long to actually submit, especially when you're more or less finished. And you do need some advice from your advisors. In a way, you sort of need the approval of your advisors, but you don't need them in order to actually submit. You can just submit if they've given you advice or not. And in this case, I think it's a great idea to give yourself a deadline. But specifically, if you're looking for feedback from your advisors, from your supervisors, give them clear deadlines of when you need that feedback by. And this is a good opportunity to use default approval language. So when you write them an email, you say, if you don't give me any feedback by this time, I will have assumed that you have approved it. I know that's kind of a heavy-handed sort of a power play, but it's kind of necessary in these cases. That doesn't mean that you just send this 2 months ahead of the time and then you never send a reminder either. You can still do sending reminders out, making sure that they haven't completely forgotten about it. But to know that that default approval is out there might actually be something of a pressure to get them to actually work for you. And I gotta say, there's nothing quite as motivating as working for free. And I know that we all sort of have this problem of having these fairly short-term contracts. You know, if we're lucky, we get a 3-year contract, but it's not unheard of to get a half-a-year contract or, you know, continually getting a year-long contract. That's certainly been the case for the expanse of my academic career. Always one, if I'm lucky, 2 years at a time. I've gotten plenty of half-year extensions. But there's nothing quite as motivating to get a project out of the way than the idea of being not even paid for it. So try to find deadlines wherever you can, especially if you're a procrastinator, quite like myself, and you're someone who just needs a lot of pressure in order to get the job done. Money can be a great deadline motivator. Just imagine, like, you're still being paid to do the job. Soon you won't even be paid. Give yourself that arbitrary cutoff line. Work towards that goal.